Hello, everyone. I'm Jean-Claude, BeyondMystic, and welcome to today's Precious Metals Report, of course, with the king of silver himself, as you can see on the screen, Mr. Andy SCHECTMAN from Miles Franklin. Andy, welcome back to the show. How are you?
JC, good to see you, brother.
Good to see you.
Normally, I'd say it's been too long, but I got to actually see you down here in Florida not too long ago, which was fantastic.
I didn't go to Florida. That was my my half brother.
Your half brother. Well, he sure sounds and looks a hell of a lot like you.
Yeah, he's a really nice guy, actually.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us here today on this live interactive show. I'm losing my voice doing all of these live streams here since I got back from my mini vacations. A big thank you to all of you for joining us here today. We are, of course, today, February 15th, and we are at that time where we're going to be announcing the winners of these beautiful silver bars. We're going to do that a little bit later on the show. A big thank you to you, Andy, again, for sponsoring this giveaway this year. Of course, we had the 100-ounce silver bar, the Pam Swiss silver bar for the American audience, and the 100-ounce RCM bar for the Canadian audience. So stay tuned, guys. A little bit later in the show, we'll be announcing that, and I'll show you guys the pictures of the winners from last year's giveaway. So it's always fun to be able to give back to the community. And a big thank you to Andy for always being here and supporting our show. You're the best, Andy. How's it going?
You are, and I'm honored to be part of what you're doing. And the more I talk to you, the more I learn about just how deep you are on so many levels. The honor is truly mine, JC, and it's great to be back again. And thanks for having me.
Well, I'm excited to have you on. Before we get into the markets themselves, there's a couple of weird things here. The CBO is saying that perhaps we're going to have a treasury default by July. We'll get into that conversation a little later today. But I was interesting to get your take on all of this. I saw a Substack earlier posted by Cliff High, and he's really suggesting here that we have to watch the language here for YouTube, but he's suggesting that we're in the thick of it now. And for most of us, we don't realize it yet. It's not the conventional skirmish. I'll just use the word skirmish for now that we're being used to. This is all being disguised and obfuscated to us. But what he's saying here in this video, guys, you can go check it out on the Substack, is that by mid-March, end of March, another quadrant of our population here in the normie line will figure out that, there is actually something wrong here. These are not happenstances, these strain derailments, the food production, plants being destroyed all over North America in the last 2-3 years here. There's something to it. Andy, what are your thoughts on that? Is this all just happenstance, or does this start to feel a little bit more coordinated in your view for now?
Yeah, there's a fine line, JC, I've learned over the years between conspiracy and reality. And I remember when people started talking about the fires in food processing plants, and it didn't seem like too much until I researched it and saw literally hundreds of processing plants burning down. It has to be going through my mind at that point more than just coincidence. And you see train derailments in multiple places at the same time. You see the what's it called? The air traffic controller software go down in the US and in Canada simultaneously. You're seeing all of these things that continue to happen. And I would argue, it just can't be just a coincidence. And it's frightening when you think about the coordination of all of this and how it continues to happen. And no, it's very concerning as far as I'm concerned. And no, I don't think it's just coincidence or happenstance. Unfortunately, it really feels in my gut that it's a lot deeper than just that.
Well, I think a lot of people watching the show are probably echoing your sentiment as well. I for one, am also. And that begs the question, though, what happens if we all make that realization at the same time? What's the next step? Clearly, if our officialdom is not willing to admit it and is not willing to do anything about it, at what point do the population have to decide for themselves here that nobody's coming to save us except ourselves? That perhaps is described in the Webot data reports that were forecasted back in 17 and 18, which seem to be landing now if you're looking at all the temporal markers of what's happening. So we could very well be in that big ugly that Cliff High was describing, Andy.
Yeah, well, it just reeks of a controlled demolition. And, I think you could argue that you see more things that relate to not just how we had trouble with the pandemic, but now when you talk about what's going on in terms of the ecology or in terms of the environment, you have so much this ESG, so much is centered around the environment that perhaps that's next on their agenda. Look, at this point, I think for people not to think of this as a coincidence and to let your mind wander a little bit I think it's a mistake to not look at it that way. And there's no question about it, but that, I think we're going to see more and more and more things like this, just like we saw more and more processing plants burn down. I don't know how many food processing and chicken processing plants that had been burnt down, and the bird flu that had all of these birds euthanized, and the dismantling of our oil and gas, and all of the things that are being done in coordination with, in particular, the loss perhaps of the petrol reserve status and how that affects this country a la the Great Reset. I mean, are they trying to create a controlled demolition to bring us all down to the common denominator? First, they let asset prices go sky high, and then you're seeing all of these things happen. And the best thing that could happen for this country would be to become self-sufficient, to rein things in, to protect our border, to do all of these things, to become more energy independent. And everything we're doing is the opposite of that. We let 5 million people into the border. We mothball and de-incentivize all of our energy independence. We're watching all our food processing plants being burnt down. We're allowing the Chinese to buy up all of our farmland. I mean, and one thing after another, you couldn't ask for more counterintuitive behavior by our leaders. And, God bless a guy like you and Cliff and who are out there talking about this, because one of the things that I find most distressing about all of this is that, this movement, this woke movement, which is supposedly so hell-bent on being, what am I trying to say? They're hell-bent on diversity, right? And for a society that claims to care so much about diversity, they're completely intolerant to ideological diversity, to having an open discussion about these kinds of things. And you have to start, saying, well, it's not exactly a conspiracy, or there's a fine line between it, or is it? I mean, are these things just happening for a reason? Is what Klaus Schwab said real, that there will be a great reset and that you won't own anything and you'll be happy because of what is impending? The message that I've been talking about, JC, for the past 3 years centers around an economic reset. But in that situation, I never really thought that we would have an infrastructure reset or a problem within the infrastructure. And it's happening side by side, which makes the whole thing that much more frightening, where we will be dependent upon the government just for subsistence. And that's a very concerning, frightening thought.
That leads us into the conversation about the economy here, Andy. I don't know if you saw this, but Tucker Carlson had Catherine Austin Fitts on the show a little while back. And this was a fabulous episode for the normies because she's laying it out there, talking about this financial coup d'etat. She's using words, of course, for the last number of years, like Mr. Global and controlled demolition, as you just mentioned here. But we have to go further. In this particular clip, she's talking about, well, if you did steal everybody's pension plans, one of the ways to get out of jail here to not have issues is to probably let those people exit stage left sooner than later. And again, watching my words for YouTube here. But what seems to be happening now is much further than just eliminating some people because we can't pay their social and Medicare bills. What seems to be here happening also is as you just said here, the amalgamation or the conjunction with the infrastructure degradation at the same time. So, I mean, where does that all come from, Andy? We're seeing all the money being printed here on the screen. Is that a result of this petrodollar dying? You and I have done many shows on this. For all intents and purposes, the dollar's already dead. We just haven't had the funeral yet, as Penny Kelly just said. What's happening now, this whole destruction and this controlled demolition, Does it all have to do with this, the money supply, Andy? What's your view on this?
100%. 100% it does. Absolutely it does. And there's no question about that. I think we realized at some point, look, 1 trillion seconds ago, JC, was 31,688 years ago. We have a 31 up of over 100 plus trillion in unfunded liabilities. Most of it accumulated at the lowest interest rates in human history. And so when you talk about a controlled demolition, you have to wonder, was the weaponizing of the dollar against Russia something that was thought through? Was it something that was intended? Because they talk about Putin's inflation. No, about the fact that we printed more money in the last 3.5 years than we did in the history of the country prior to it, which created distortions and misallocations in resources and assets that have gone sky high. So you have an environment where inflation was created by the Federal Reserve, yet they found a scapegoat to blame Putin. Well, how about you take a step back from there and talk about all of the misallocations and distortions going back to 2008, where the Federal Reserve's balance sheet has grown from 800 billion to 9 trillion, creating all of these distortions. Maybe they realized that we were at the end of the Keynesian road. We were at the end of this fiat road where we have literally milked $130 trillion out of the system that we owe, most of it unfunded, most of it really without an ability to pay back. So either we fall on the sword and those responsible for it are accused of treason, perhaps, or at the very least are written about in very unflattering terms in history books, or we weaponize the dollar after we blow up asset prices to all-time highs and create a villain. And that villain are those sons of bitches, Putin and Xi Jinping and OPEC and all of these countries that are joining together to extricate themselves from this Western hegemony that has been centuries old. And the way that you do that is to incentivize everyone to finding an alternative to the system. And when they all drop the system, like Mike Adams calls it, Project Sandman, where all the countries drop the dollar at once. Now, that's very similar to what I've been saying for a long time, where OPEC, all the 13 OPEC producing countries on the Belt Road, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, and the BRICS nations all come together, which represent north of 80% of human population, all rallying against the West and their perceived hypocrisy. And their strong arming and the ability to shut you off like that, just like they did to Russia. And heck, even the European Union, who did the same thing, just came and said, those assets we sanctioned from Russia, well, we're going to confiscate them now to use them to rebuild the Ukraine. So these countries have been incentivized into finding an alternative. And perhaps the question that I would ask, again, there's a fine line between conspiracy and reality. Was this intended or not? Did they realize that $130 trillion worth of debt accumulated at the lowest interest rates ever is something we will never dig ourselves out of? So how about if we are going to reset, we find a villain? And if things get bad enough, and what adds up, really, you just opened my eyes right now to the infrastructure side of things. If we make it painful enough and bad enough, then the public will be begging for them to come in with the new central bank digital currency, just like the Bank of International Settlement said every country needs it by 2025. They'll come begging for it, for help to feed themselves, to have money, and everyone will start over being dropped down to a common denominator. And so the question I ask, that I pose very often to people, is, was this intended or was it not intended? Is it happenstance? Is it a coincidence? Is it a reaction? Are our leaders that naive? They're nefarious, yes, but stupid, no. And so I don't know. I think it's a very, very interesting thought experiment to put the two together.
Well, folks, I encourage you to go check out this interview with Tucker Carlson. As you can see on the screen here, they are talking about CBDCs and how that can bring complete control and this social credit score into a surveillance state, basically. So we're heading down that path. At least that's where they seem to be wanting to heading us down the path. But we need to resist. I think I just saw a video from Max Egan today. He's in Acapulco, and he was saying, yeah, non-compliance here. But I think it goes further than non-compliance. And again, if you go listen to Cliff High's report from earlier today, at some point, non-compliance is not enough. There's evil here. It's not just incompetency. It's not just different jurisdiction doing their own thing in their little kingdom. It really appears to be this world coordinated attack on humanity and basically putting us back into the box. And that in that video, Catherine is talking about the war on cash also. That leads us into perhaps how this is all going to break down. In the last fall, you were on the show with Bill Holter, and Bill was talking about, okay, the Fed has decided to pull the plug. And so we saw the interest rates starting to go up a couple of times already now, including here in Canada. And we saw just last week or 2 weeks ago in Canada that they raised rates again, but they said, maybe we'll pause here and look at it. That suggests perhaps what some analysts are talking about, that a Fed pivot is about to occur. So that's my question. Do you believe in this Fed pivot here, or do you think they're full gone metal, pedal to the metal here to create as much pain as possible in order to force us through this new solution that they want to present to us? How do you see this unfolding?
Yeah, I don't know if, first of all, if they were full pedal to the metal, they'd stop pussyfooting around and they'd raise interest rates above the CPI number, which should be called the CPI number. The CPI number, which they keep changing the third or fourth or fifth time since 1980, just recently here. Even the CPI number, this last tick was 6.5% or whatnot. If you ask John Williams of Shadow Stats, as we've mentioned many times, he would say it's closer to 15%. But they would have to raise rates above that. But I find it interesting that they keep raising rates because somehow first inflation wasn't a problem, then it was transitory. Then it was structural, but then it started to wane. And yet, even though the inflation is supposedly waning, they keep raising rates from 4 to 4.5 to 4.75. They won't tell us what the final destination is. They just don't want us to panic and sell. And it's funny that New York Fed official with the same name, John Williams, is now calling for 5.5% on the federal funds rate. It keeps going up. It's like everything they tell us is a lie, and yet we continue to somehow believe it. We get suckered into believing what they say, just like it was transitory, then it wasn't, and then it's structural, and then it's peaked, and well, it hasn't peaked. And so I think that when you look at right now, to your point, the inversion right now in the yield curve is the biggest. It's the biggest inversion we've seen in 40 years, and it's been a long time. And if you look at previous recessions, usually you have a little bit of an inversion in the yield curve, which precedes a recession. This has been a massive length of time in the inversion, along with the steepest it's been in 40 years. It would tell us that there will be one hell of a recession, and this is when the Fed obviously would pivot, if that is indeed what they are going to do. But I don't know that they will, because it's one of these deals where you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't, in the respect that at that point it signals to the world that we have given up on austerity, we have given up on the tough decisions, and we will do what all governments have done, and that is to inflate our way out of this problem. A mentor of mine, Richard Russell, used to say, we are at the point in time where it's inflate or die. Now, this was a decade ago. Now, here we are, much worse off. Yeah. And I guess I would simply say to you that I don't think they will pivot this year. I think they will let this pain really get bad. And I guess we shall see if I'm wrong on that. I have a feeling that they won't. I think they have to continue to do this to maintain any semblance of credibility. Right. Then you look at what's going on in the market too. I mean, the stocks are still historically overvalued at 22 times price to earnings on the S&P. The mean over the last, several decades is 14. It's 30% above the average. And, it's one of these deals where I don't think that they will pivot the way that the bond traders do. I think they'll just keep stringing us along, and we're going to have to raise it another half point because it's come back a little bit stronger. Look, you got OPEC, who just cut, Saudi Arabia just cut 156,000 barrels per day on top of Russia's 500,000. And then our glorious president decides to further raid the strategic oil reserves by another 25 million barrels, which is short-lived at best. When you put the 656 million or 1,000 barrels of oil per day that these two entities, Russia and Saudi Arabia, have withheld, now pulled back, it's not going to take very long for that to, less than a month for the strategic stockpile pillaging to run its course. And
do you think? Let me just take you for a sidebar here as you're talking. You know how you and I have been looking at the COMEX and the commitment of trader reports for years, and we're like, yeah, it's nice to look at, but we can't have any confidence in these numbers. Is it possible also when we talk about these SPRs, the Strategic Petroleum Reserves, that somehow they're skewing the numbers because they're anticipating this war, and what we see as a withdrawal on the SPRs is really to hide that reserve into another place, expecting perhaps this dismantling of our infrastructure? Has that crossed your mind at all?
I don't think you can believe really any of the numbers that come out. And coincidentally, I don't know if you've noticed, but the numbers that come out of the COMEX, they've been hacked. The feed that is provided, and I think the feed comes, I want to say, out of Ireland for some weird reason. That company has been hacked, and we haven't seen the Commitment to Trader report numbers for I think about 2 weeks now.
Yeah.
So interestingly enough, but yeah, I do think I've often, especially in terms of the Commitment to Traders report, I think all of the numbers that we are fed from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, you can pull the L out of there and it just be BS. And in particular, when you look at the COMEX numbers, when you look at the official numbers, look, when you talk about all of the numbers they give us, when I started in this industry, they used to publish something called M3, which is the broadest measure of the money supply. They got rid of that. They keep massaging and changing the way that they define inflation. Yes, it's to meet an agenda. And it's just like the Chinese who don't tell us how much gold they have. Why would we be completely transparent about anything? But here again, taking it at face value, they are pillaging what is supposed to be a strategic stockpile to combat this in this continued tightness. And look, as far as I'm concerned, because this will only reignite inflation as the cost of gasoline and energy moves up again as a result of this, it's just going to make the Fed more hawkish, and they can't pivot and become dovish and reignite with inflation rearing its head again. They'll only pour gasoline on top of a fire. So what OPEC is doing and what Russia is doing, in theory, ought to make the Fed more hawkish and push rates higher. But at the same
time, I mean, we're in this situation for years now where the tail is wagging the dog. So yes. I get your logic point of view here. Let's move on to the CBO here, because you just mentioned something a couple of minutes ago about damned if you do, damn if you don't. You don't know if they're going to raise rates or do the pivot. Yep. Is it possible that an external event like this really is what is the last kicker in the can here, so to speak? Cliff High is talking about maybe a derivatives bomb going up anytime soon now, as per his data reports, and that being the first of many that we're going to live through here in the spring and in the summertime. And here we have now the Congressional Budget Officer saying that, hey, we actually might see a U.S. Treasury default as early as July. So as they play with these rates, you can manipulate, you could put a heavy thumb on the scale as much as you want, but at some point there is unintended consequences. This is one here on mainstream news. What do you make of that? The Treasury default, what it means, the realization of people, and then that huge onrush that we've been talking about, people going back into physical gold and silver to extricate themselves from all of this craziness that we're seeing in our markets. And
well, this is exactly why they suppress the price of gold and silver, because it's not a commodity, it's the canary. And they want to step on the canary before their goal is met. But when you talk about the Treasury defaulting, first of all, we should have defaulted a long time ago. They had to raise the debt ceiling by taking extraordinary measures. Those extraordinary measures are absolutely disgusting, what Janet Yellen did. And a lot of people don't know what she did because I had to dig to find it. And I found it on a Yahoo Finance article. Those extraordinary measures to raise the debt ceiling were that she borrowed money from the Postal Retirement Fund, from the Civil Servants Retirement Fund, and the Disabled Veterans Retirement Fund, and filled it with IOUs to raise the debt ceiling. And what's disgusting about that very next article talked about how they just voted to give the Ukraine another $50 billion as they're stealing money from retirement accounts of civil servants, disabled veterans, and postal workers. And when you talk about another thing that adds to that is that the Federal Reserve, they earn income, right, from the bonds that they own, from services they provide to the financial sector. And so the profit after operating expenses is handed over to the Treasury. And so the Fed has been giving the Treasury money for a very long time. Over the last several years, since really 2008, they've accumulated a ton of treasuries and mortgage-backed securities. The Fed has, and those mortgage-backed securities and those treasuries are all long maturity, typically 30 years at low interest rates, because they were all bought the 0, 1, 2, 3% federal fund rate. And on the other side of the equation, they have $2.55 trillion right now in the overnight repo market that the Fed is currently paying 4.3% on top of 4.65% interest on excess reserves that the commercial banks are parking with them. So they have huge obligations short term at high rates versus assets on the back end of their asset sheet with long maturities at low rates. This is very, very bad. In fact, what it has done has created a $31 billion in operating losses that ultimately is owed to the Treasury by the Fed if and when they ever become profitable. Now, there's an old saying that if you own the bank $200,000 and you go bankrupt, you're in trouble. But if you owe the bank $200 million,
it's their problem.
Their problem. And when you talk about a Fed right now, they have $8.5 trillion balance sheet against capital reserves of 35 billion. They're 200 times over leveraged. Just what if part of this whole plan, if you want to talk good guys versus bad guys, is to let interest rates go to the moon and the Fed blows up? Who's to say they don't? I'm just throwing that out there. But all I could simply say to you is that, yes, we are technically insolvent. The Treasury is. They have to steal from retirement accounts from people who have devoted their life to civil service just to give money to the Ukraine, which is the damnedest thing I've ever seen. So when you talk about the potential of the Treasury going bankrupt, it's not just hyperbole. It's not conspiracy. It should have happened a long time ago, because it's not like you and I can just vote to raise our debt limit. If I spend more money on this card and I'm at my limit, I can't say, you know what, I'm going to vote myself another $100,000 limit. Nope. Doesn't work that way. So yeah, I think what Cliff said is spot on. And what's happening with the Fed is only adding fuel to that fire.
Not only can we not raise ourselves our debt limits, but we have to mark to market our assets. These guys are market to market, marking to unicorn their assets. Going back to the relationship, Andy, between the Fed and the Treasury, Bix is of the opinion, and a well-researched opinion, and I think Cliff is coming to this conclusion also, that there's something happening at the mint level where perhaps they're actually producing more than they say they've been producing. They've increased their production capabilities over the number of years, only to fall short on the actual announced and advertised production, this last year being an example of that. And Bix was saying it's not possible that they're running out of blanks. We have 1,000-ounce COMEX bars. What's the excuse for them not creating the Silver Eagle program, for example, right? So he's trying to get at what the hell is happening. Is it possible, Andy, in your view, that they are in fact producing but hoarding silver here for the advent of the crescendo of events we're just talking about now?
100%. 100%. And I sponsored Bix's roadshow, and I spent some time traveling in a Winnebago with Bix and his wife, and had some really deep conversations. And I agree with that. I mean, I remember, I don't remember what year it was. There were 2 or 3 or 4 years in a row, maybe somewhere in the neighborhood of probably 2013, 14, 15, somewhere in that neighborhood. They were making 40 and 50 million Silver Eagles a year, and the Canadian Mint was 25, 30 Maple Leafs million per year. And I remember saying to myself, who the hell's buying all this? Because this was when the markets were very soft. I remember going to a meeting at Brinks in Montreal and seeing boxes, huge crates filled with silver that were all addressed to be going to being shipped out to wherever they were going, filled with silver eagles and silver maple leafs, and it just didn't make sense to me who was buying all of this. And the production of 40, 50 million silver eagles has never really been duplicated. Last year, I think they only made 14 or 15 million. They're only making roughly 450,000 a month right now.
Yeah.
Do the math times 12. I mean, they're or excuse me.
Well, in terms of what they're officially advertising, that's
and I was wrong on that. I think it's 450,000 every other week, something like that. But it's still the same thing. They're sending out to all of us distributors, let's say 15 million a year, when they have the capacity to make 4 times that. And I mean, when you talk about an asset that is completely and totally depleted, for the last 3 years, it's been easier for me to get Kruger ants from South Africa, kangaroos from Australia, Philharmonics from Austria, and Britannias from the UK than it has been for eagles. And I'm one of only 27 authorized U.S. mint resellers in the world. And if you were going to, here again, this fine line between conspiracy and reality, move into a place where, and Janet Yellen is on a video on the web page, on the Mint's webpage, saying we have ramped up our production. That's what Bix is talking about. The hell they have. They're 25% of what they used to be. So if you wanted to realizing that we've sold all of our strategic stockpile of silver years ago, we don't have any as a country, this would be a way to do it very privately. And I think there are a lot of things that go on in government that we don't know about. We're told half-truths and whatnot. And sure, I think that is very, very plausible, because where we are going, if you look at what the biggest money in the world is doing, and all of these countries in the East, like India, who imported 320 million ounces of silver last year, that's more silver than the entire COMEX ecosystem holds, of which the majority of the metal in COMEX is not for sale. It's in what's called the eligible category, owned by companies like mine, clients, individual clients, family offices. There's only about 35 million ounces of silver in the registered category, bars that are available for delivery backing the contracts. The London Metals Exchange says if we have the same amount of deliveries in silver that we did in 22, there'll be no silver left in 23. They just publicly said that. So when you talk about how important silver is as an industrial strategic metal, absolutely, that would make great sense to me for them to produce much, much more and hold it and keep it and hide it, and use supply chain issues or trouble securing blanks or whatever excuses they want to come up with. I think, as usual, one of the things I love about Bix Weir is that his takes are so unique and wholly unique from what everyone else says. And the more you think about them, they make tremendous sense. He's a very smart man, and I 100% give him credit for this. It makes great sense to me.
Well, if the smart money or the good guys behind the scene are stockpiling silver, it behooves the audience members to think, okay, maybe I should revisit the way I'm staying away hard-earned savings. Where do I do that right now? Where are my choices? I want to get into this video you just produced earlier today on Arcadia Economics about inflation. Talk about what you're seeing now, what the picture looks like, and what does the regular guy on the street do here to try to get out of harm's way in terms of the decreasing purchasing power of their dollar here that we're seeing, perhaps also just as a mirage right now, and not the big picture as John Williams is talking about. Let's get into the conversation of what this inflation really is and how bad it is for us, and perhaps tools and tips that we can use here to get out of harm's way here.
Inflation is very real, and I think it will. Like I said, they keep saying, well, it's waning, it's peaked, it's heading down, soft landing, and it's reared its head in these areas, and they're wrong about their projections continuously. They have been as long as they've been in existence. So we have to stop believing them, because inflation is not going anywhere. Inflation is always an increase in the money supply. The distortions in the supply chains only make it worse. And when you create as much money as has been created by the Fed and the Treasury and over the last several years, it's still working its way through from what they did starting in 2009. I don't think inflation is going anywhere for a while, but there's an old saying that assets feed you and liabilities eat you. I want you to think of it in this way. JP Morgan just came out with a report about China. Now, they say China currently holds 80% of the global copper inventory, 70% of the global corn inventory, 51% of the global wheat, 46% of the global soybeans, 70% of the global crude, and 20% of the global aluminum inventories. Now, let's extrapolate that back to the average person. You're not going to be able to do things like that. But what they are doing is they are preparing with assets, and they are de-dollarizing, if you will. It's almost as if they're either preparing for war, God forbid, or at the very least de-dollarizing. And that is what you have to do in this inflationary scenario. And this is specifically the reason that they step on gold and silver, because it is the canary in the mine shaft, because it does speak to the truth of what is happening. And this is exactly why the big money is using the suppressed price to drain the exchanges of all of their metal before the rest of us figure it out. You figure it out by owning assets. You save yourself by owning assets and being prepared and doing what everyone else is doing and mitigating your exposure to the US dollar. As horrible and as sad as that sounds, it's true. And when you look at the moves that are being made by the BRICS nations, who, Saudi Arabia in Davos last week said, we are open to taking other currencies for oil. Well, if that's not the death knell on top of everything else that we've heard, and when that moment happens, if we're all focused on what Jerome Powell is doing, and that's stupid, because if Saudi Arabia, with all 13 OPEC producing countries that are situated on the Belt Road Initiative, which all of them together in the Belt Road, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, and the BRICS comprise north of 85% of human population. And one of your listeners asks, is Mexico planning on joining the BRICS? Yes, they have expressed interest in it. Our allies are joining BRICS. Turkey bought more gold than anyone in the world this year. They just applied for BRICS. So did Saudi Arabia. And bang, like that. If they say, hey, thanks for the memories, it's been great, we're going to open up oil in the new petro yuan digital currency, or the petro yuan bond that is immediately convertible into gold on the Shanghai Gold Exchange, or the Shanghai Cooperation Organization is talking about a gold-backed settlement currency for all of the Eurasian continent, or whatever the settlement currency is, even if it's rupee, ruble, gold, and yuan. And thanks, West, but you've told us you're going green. You don't need our oil anymore. Why do you think they're all pulling back production, making it tougher on us? They're angry at us, and I don't blame them. We're ruining their way of life. How fast do you think inflation spikes? Because every country on the planet since 1974 has had to own dollars to buy oil. And if they don't any longer, and they can go to a different currency that they'd rather use, and everyone sells dollars in unison, it creates a tsunami of inflation that hits our shores, and interest rates spike. Yeah. And that's when it gets really, really real. And that is why I think making these moves in a proactive fashion, not being disheartened by the manipulation of the metals. Yes, it's aggravating as hell. I get it. But what betrays that manipulation, what betrays that price action, is how the exchanges are being bled down by the most sophisticated money in the world. Right. I mean, to pull contracts off of COMEX or the LME is incredibly sophisticated. It is not easy to do. It would be far easier to call a guy like me and say, here's $50 million, get me silver, than it would be to go and pull it off of the COMEX market. And so I think that what you are seeing is the most well-funded, well-informed, and and influential traders on the globe draining the exchanges, using price as a tool of misdirection because of the impending inflation that is coming, because of the massive de-dollarization, and because of what ultimately will be a shift, perhaps, in the dollar as a sole settlement currency for oil. And if that happens, which it looks more and more and more, unfortunately, like it's going to, then if you think inflation is bad now, you ain't seen shit. Pardon my French, because it will happen. It will.
Well, not only will it happen, I think I agree. It's a question of it's already baked in the cake. And so I think this is what, as you're saying, the sophisticated money is sniffing out. And that's why we're seeing these drawdowns of all of these physical metal supplies here. Guys, I invite you to go watch the interview today with Chris Marcus on Arcadia Economics. Andy, I wanted to switch gears here too, because as you're talking about inflation, when I had, not in this particular episode, but one after that, just before Rob Kirby passed away, um, God rest his soul, he mentioned the fact that the de-dollarization was already happening and in a bigger way than we perhaps knew. He was pointing at some of the numbers also in some cryptocurrencies and some country doing these bilateral agreements outside of the petrodollar. Now, we've seen a huge acceleration of that. In my last interview with Jim Willie, we talked about reaching critical mass. It's no longer apparently an act of war as it would have been viewed and acted upon maybe 10 years ago. Now we're really at that end. And what Rob Kirby was saying was like, everybody's de-dollarizing. Don't be the last fool in the room holding holding paper dollars or US dollars. I think we're there now. Somebody in the chat, Andy, was asking you when. Let me see if I can bring up the comment here I had started for you. J Crypto Minded, he says, the question is, how much longer? Bix has been waiting for 20 years, been talking about this for a long time, and he wishes he didn't know about silver 20 years ago and have to go through this now and be here just at this last critical moment. But do you think, as Jay's saying here, that we have 10 more years to go? Are we looking at 10 more months? Are we looking at 10 hours? I mean, the whole situation we're looking at, again, is just crazy. The tail's wagging the dog, and we seem to have absentee regulators. We have absentee politicians. At some point here, rubber has to hit the road. But are we waiting another 10 years, Andy? What do you say to the audience?
I've done this for 34 years. This year, our company is 34 years old, and this month, I've never experienced chaos all around me like we have right now. This has been the greatest country in the world to live in, to grow up in, to raise a family in, to start a business in. The opportunities that were presented to me and everyone else in the United States has been a blessing, no question about it. It's never been like it is right now. We have never been, I think, looked upon the way that we are now. And I think the world is very upset, not only of the mismanagement of the world reserve currency, but of the strong arming and the perceived hypocrisy. And many of these countries who only a few years ago wouldn't have been strong enough militarily or economically to stand up to us are, and they're doing so in a coalesced fashion, a growing chorus of anger. And I think what makes it all work is the pegging of commodities to a system. Even the BRICS nations, they rotate their presidency. They're doing things the right way. People say to me, well, look at the euro. They didn't make it work. They have too many conflicting ideologies and histories together. And I agree with that, even more so with the BRICS nations and the countries in the Arab states. But what, the old saying, my enemy's enemy is my friend. And, I think that it's one of these deals where what makes it work, we've been told that all of these countries are going to pledge commodities to what the BRICS nations calls a new reserve currency pegged to commodities. It is the glue that will make this work. The distributed ledger technology that has backed the Chinese digital yuan for over 4 years, north of 25 billion in successful settlements, could very well be the rails for the new Shanghai Cooperation Organization settlement currency, or for the new BRICS nation settlement currency, all of it pegged to commodities pledged by countries that are all joining together in a chorus against the West. And I do believe it is happening. It never has been like this. But to that point, to Jay's point, it's fair. I'm the little boy who cries wolf. I have been my whole career. And at the end of the story, wolf comes. I often say that. And it's a curse that we have, some of us, like myself and like Bix, who see things very clearly based upon logic and mathematics and economics. What has been amazing is the way and the length to which the powers that be have been able to string this along. And I think that they've tried to milk as much out of the system as they possibly could. But when you get to a period of time where you're down to 0% interest rates and more debt created than in the history of the world, you've run out of options. Either you go negative, which they haven't done, or you raise rates. Well, if you raise rates high enough, you blow everything up. And if you go the other way, you signal you're choosing the printing press over the tough decisions, and you blow everything up ultimately as well through inflation and higher interest rates as a byproduct. We're damned if we do, we're damned if we don't. We've never been here. to this point. And one of the things that I find most rattling, if you will, to your point, is that when I started talking about this stuff, I got a lot of notoriety because I was the only one talking about it in 2019 and 2020. And now everyone's talking about it. The reason everyone's talking about it isn't because I started talking about it, it's because it's right in your damn face and it's everywhere. Every single day, there's 6 or 7 or 8 new articles. Just in the past couple of days, we see South Sudan no longer allows any dollars to be used in settlement currencies. We see a new digital cross-border payment system between Iran and Russia. I mean, this was just in the last couple of days. We see that Egypt is loading up on gold. They're up 33% from last year. We're seeing every day there are more articles about, the Russian media reports that they will remove the euro completely from their Russian wealth fund. They already did the dollars and will only be yuan and gold. And now we just see that the United States told all Americans living or traveling in Russia to get out of the country.
I remember watching the documentary, The Hidden Secrets of Money with Mike Maloney.
Yes.
In one of those series, he talked about the coffin of the US dollar and all of these nails. And I was looking at the coffin, there's like already a lot of nails back then. I'm like, okay, we're almost there. But what you're talking about now, it's a staccato
it's
of
happening
nails
so fast.
on
And
a
that's
daily
the
basis.
scary part.
Yeah.
That is, JC. So yes, all of us have been early, and there's, I could come up with trite statements like it's better to be 6 years early than 60 seconds late. And it's all hyperbole and it's frustrating, but in the end, we will be right. I know that mathematically we will. And I will tell you the one thing that's different this time than all of the years past is the speed in which the ball is spinning, and it's going faster and faster and faster. What started out as a story every few months in 2019 is a new story every day. Where I do my preparation for my next week podcast on Saturday, Sunday, Monday. I have 6 pages worth of notes all centered around what these BRICS nations are doing. It used to be 1 item and that was it. And now it's 6 in a couple of days instead of 1 in a couple of months.
I do this big monthly show, the Beyond Crypto Woo, where we look at markets, gold, crypto, and silver. And it used to take me 2-3 hours to prep. Now it takes me 2 days to prep, and I have to squeeze it down because it would never all fit in one show anymore. There's so much.
That's the point. And so when you ask that question, when's it going to happen? Don't know. More so, I think the likelihood of it happening is far greater than it's ever been. And you can see if this was a game of chess, all of these countries are getting close to having us surrounded and calling check at the very least.
Yeah. When I was a kid, I remember this guy, I forget who it was, it said this quote, and it's been repeated many times after that, but something like the markets can be irrational longer than you can say solvent, right?
Right.
There are a lot of people in the chat right now saying, JC, savings. Who has savings? Did you see the price of food and all that? So for people who are just looking at this now, like, you can't bet the house on it for some extent. We could wait another 10 years for it. Like some people are right here. We don't know. The answer is we don't know when. It looks like it's going to happen sooner than later, but we don't know. What would you tell the people here in terms of getting into this market without necessarily betting the farm on it here so that they can withstand all of this irrational craziness in the markets? What is your strategy?
The same advice my father gave me 34 years ago, the best advice I've ever been given in my life, the greatest gift he ever gave me. We started this company, JC, my dad and I, on a wing and a prayer. My dad was a hippie when growing up and a history major. And by happenstance, we started this company in 1989 on a wing and a prayer in a one-room office the size of a closet. My dad's middle name is Miles, and his best friend at the time who lent us $60,000, middle name was Franklin. And he said to me when I came to start the company with him 6 months after he started it, he said, there's one rule and only one rule or I'll fire you. And I've told this story on your show before. And I said, okay, I can deal with that. What's the one rule? He says, you'll buy something every 2 weeks. I don't care what it is. I don't care if it's 1 ounce of silver, but you'll buy something. And I have honored my promise to him, even though he's been retired for 20 years and I own the company. He won't fire me anymore, but I've honored my promise for 33 and a half years. And I have bought something every 2 weeks. I pay myself first. And it doesn't matter if it's 1 ounce of silver or more than that. The point of it is that you have to take care of yourself first. You have to pay yourself first. And it doesn't matter how much you have. It just matters that you're doing something. And whatever that something may be, doesn't mean you have to buy gold and silver. Maybe it means preparing in terms of supplies for your home, or getting out of debt, or whatever it may be. You pay yourself first. And I think that's the most important thing. Do something constructive. Now, in my case, it was buying silver or gold every 2 weeks. And I have never missed a 2-week period ever in over 33 years. And that is the greatest gift my father has ever given me, ever. He taught me how to save. And if you don't pay yourself first, you are on the rat wheel forever. And that's the only advice I could give someone in this environment. You don't have to be wealthy in order to protect yourself little by little by little. You have to start somewhere. You know, it's like if you have to walk 100 miles, you got to take the first step. And that's the best advice I can. And it's true. You don't have to be wealthy. I have people who will spend $300 every 2 weeks with me. And on a trade like that, on $300, my company's making $4 or $5. That's it. But I do it because it's the right thing to do. A lot of companies have minimum order requirements. We don't, because I believe it's the right thing to do. And that's how you help yourself, by paying yourself first, always. And if that means that you have to send in $50 out of the $75 bill to whatever company you're paying a bill, they'll understand. They'll bill you that $25 on your next bill. At least you're making an attempt. And then also you're first paying yourself. And that's the only way to ever get ahead.
And I think I've said this on the show too. First of all, great advice. Everybody agrees with you. Tom agrees with you on the chat too. I often said to people when I was teaching about crypto way back when, and people saying, I don't have money for this. I said, well, just walk around your house with a clipboard and a pen and just write down the things as you walk around the house that you haven't used in a year. And you'll find out you have a lot more shit than you need. And you might want to sell that on Kijiji or Craigslist or whatever the equivalent local markets. And there you go. That gets you started at least. And once you get started, and when you have that silver in your hand and you realize, fuck, this is real money, you know, you don't miss that 2-week program, as you're just saying. You get invested in it. You feel good about it. And silver brings silver in your whole life. Anyways, I hope that makes sense.
I say one quick thing to Mr. Henry Cooper. Mr. Cooper, the MF in Canada is not my company. It is a relationship I have with one of the greatest guys I've known in all my career. He's a Royal Canadian Mint distributor, and we have a special relationship, but it's not my company. I don't make the rules in Canada, but in terms of here in the U.S. with Miles Franklin, there is no order minimum. So I wish that I would be able to do that, but the Canadian division has minimum requirements, and that is separate from the way that I run my business. Although we are very closely connected, and I vouch for him with my life, it's not my company.
Yeah, we have a lot of great clients here also that uses them, mfbullion.ca. Yeah, guys, if you want to check it out right now, the silver maples are at $5.79 over spot here, Canadian. On the American side, of course, we have the 10-ounce silver nadir bars at $2.30 over spot, and you can find those at beyondmystic.net/silver. This is the contact form that goes directly to Andy, and the coupons here for the Beyond Mystic audience. And here on the American side, you can get the maples here at $3.45 US the over spot. Andy, there was one last question here before we get to the silver contest. Someone was asking, do you think silver could surpass gold? I mean, Jim Sinclair was on like for the last 10 years talking about how when this all goes down, it looks like we're close to it now, this, like quote unquote, this, he always said that silver would be like gold, but on steroids. We have Clefai in his Webbot data that we would eventually get to parity and also surpass gold. You talked about this lack of strategic reserves of silver here in North America. Do you think we can get to that silver parity or even gold parity or even past the price of gold? Andy?
Well, I think we can get real close for sure. I mean, it's coming out of the ground right now at a 7-to-1 relationship to gold. For 5,000 years, it was 16-to-1. Let's remember that silver is found in nature in a form called epithermal, very near the surface. So the big deposits have been found a long, long time ago, even before advanced imagery. And so when you talk about could it get to 1-to-1, well, they're pulling 7 ounces of silver out of the ground for every 1 ounce of gold. But we are in a period of time where the expansion in uses for silver in green and industrial battery powered vehicles, solar panels, There's 500 ounces of silver almost to the button in the tip of every Tomahawk cruise missile. Silver is a strategic metal. What makes silver so unique and would give it the opportunity to find parity with gold is its duality and demand. And yes, gold has a little bit of demand in industrial applications like in microchips and circuits and whatnot, but primarily it's a monetary metal, where gold or silver has a massive industrial footprint and it's expanding. At the same time, it's experienced a monetary renaissance. So the demand, this duality in demand, coupled with the depletion in geologic supply, yes, absolutely, I do. I think if you wanted to talk about a true statement that would not be unrealistic, I mean, if you take gold right now at 1840 and divide by 7, if we woke up tomorrow morning and found silver at $262 an ounce, that disappeared, 262, that wouldn't be outrageous. You got major players in commercial bank world talking about gold at $3,000 and $4,000 an ounce in the very near future. So take 3,000 and divide it by 7, and you get $428 an ounce. And you're getting closer and closer to Cliff's numbers. And could it happen? Absolutely, especially as we deplete greater and greater amounts of silver because of its expansion in uses. And just because the mining industry tells us it's coming out of the ground at 7-to-1 doesn't mean it will stay that way. Maybe it all of a sudden becomes less and less and less of a geologic footprint. Because remember, let's say they mine 1 billion ounces of silver per year. Only 350 million of that comes from companies that specifically mine silver.
Right. Everything else is a derivative. Yeah.
It's right. It's other companies mining stuff that has nothing to do with silver. Oh, look, we found some silver. Let's sell it. And so it's becoming an asset that's becoming very difficult to find and has more and more uses. And when you see a country like India import 304 million ounces last year, that should tell you the significance of it, the importance of it. And yeah, I think, I would never discount something that Cliff High says ever. And by the same token, I would tell you that it's rooted in logic. And it even all of his web data and all of that stuff, it's rooted in mathematics and in logic. And so the answer, and Bix, who will tell you it will go past gold, is possibly. Now, the only thing that makes it difficult for people to wrap their head around is 5,000 years worth of history tell you no, gold is 16 times more rare than silver. But what no one else is telling you is that, or some are, I guess, is that above ground supplies, you could argue silver is more scarce than gold. Yeah. Now, it's not more rare geologically yet, but it arguably is more scarce when you talk about the fact that so much in the way of silver over the last 80 years, anything that is used in industry, that silver's in landfills. Exactly. Because a tiny little piece of it goes into the motherboard of a hairdryer or the all of the stuff within anything that conducts electricity or electronics or whatnot, that stuff's gone forever. So it's becoming scarcer and scarcer and scarcer. So yes, I do think it's possible. I truly do. Look,
just as a quick update, Cliff High was running his reports once the algorithms and the censorship was maybe throttled back on Twitter. And he said something to the effect that he's seeing the $600 silver forecast for this year now. He's getting enough clarity on all of that to make that prediction that we're finally here. Also added to all of these other temporal markers hitting at the same time. They were all part of the same data set. So take that audience for what it is. But at the same time, what's your alternative? Where do you put your hard-earned money? Whether those are your savings or the money you're making today, where do you put it? Where do you put it out of harm's way when you see all of this stuff happening in the background?
That's the $6 million question, JC, because the traditional forms of investment that make us all feel wealthy, stocks, bonds, and real estate, are all inversely correlated to what is coming. Yeah. So I would say that gold and silver arguably are the safest place to put it. And I try to be objective to that. Now, I'm sure there are people out there who will tell you that there are some better places too, or other places. For my money, that's where I feel the most comfortable. And again, this is not about getting wealthy. It is wealth. And you own enough of it, you'll be wealthy. But no, this is, to me, it is the perfect place to put it with the impending storm bearing down on us.
And what better time, Andy, to give away some silver? With all of that said, guys, let me introduce you to the winner. This was the American winner of the 2022 Beyond Mystic Silver Bar giveaway. And this one here was for the Canadian side of our audience members last year. I believe his name was Marcel. So thank you to all of you. And so for this year, yes, we have the same 2 100-ounce bars to give away. The first one is going to Jelena Matic from, I'll say Canada. I won't say the address online. So Jelena Matic, I will send you an email today. Congratulations to you for the 100-ounce RCM silver bar. And for the PAMP Swiss 100-ounce bar in the US, it's Denise Finney. I'll just say south of the border for now. I will be sending both of you emails right here after the show, and I've already sent Andy all of your mailing address to get those bars to you. And if you like, and if you feel it's appropriate, please do send me a picture when you receive the bar, and we'll put that up on the screen to share that with the audience members, if of course you feel that is cool. Andy, we're already at the hour mark. Anything else you want to share with the audience members? What's going on in your world? Anything new? I know you've been skiing a lot and having a lot of fun here in the last couple of weeks. Any plans on any new travel? Or are you bunkering down here for perhaps this weird warfare we seem to be engaged in here? What's going on?
Yeah, I think I'm hunkering down, and it was good to get out and and have a little bit of free time. Skiing in Colorado was incredible. It was wonderful to see you. And no, I don't have many plans. I'll be keeping my ear to the track. I love coming on your show. You're so smart. You ask such great questions, and just so everyone knows, we don't ever rehearse what he's going to ask me, and he asked great questions, and so I like the challenge. I love being here. I love talking to your listeners. We our whole company does, and I'm honored to be part of what you're doing, Jean-Claude. Very, very much. I say that from the bottom of my heart. I truly am. You are quite a guy, and so for what it's worth, I am always excited to come back on. Always happy to be here and report the news the way that I see it. And I'm just a phone call away. Anytime you need me to come back, count me in.
Well, you're such a wealth of information, Andy. You're so eloquent, and you have such a class about you, and you exude a lot of confidence, and that's why I love having you on the show. So a big thank you to you, right back at you, Andy. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us here today. You guys are amazing. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe, and move on over, if you still have time, to Julie's channel. She's recording right now the Astro Decode with Meg on this Saturn return and aspects. You don't want to miss that show. That's going to be really, really cool. And tonight, of course, we have the pay-per-view here on Beyond Mystic. We're going to be decoding more of this asymmetrical 5-generational warfare we seem to be engaged in. So don't miss that. I love you guys. Have a great day, and we'll
congratulations to the winners. See you, JC.
All right, take care. Au revoir.
Au revoir.